Hey guys, and welcome to another video, and welcome to my apparently not so monthly wrap-up. So yes, today is going to be a wrap-up video where I tell you about all the books that I have recently read, because I apparently fail at keeping up to date with that. There are a few books on this list that I actually read about 2 months ago and planned doing a whole video for a review and then decided against it, so this is why you haven't heard me talk about House of Leaves yet. But seeing as I am already way behind, let's just talk about the books. And the first book I am going to talk about today is And the Trees Crept In by Dawn Kurtagich, which I read on my Kindle. Now I'm going to state from the start that I really enjoyed this book. Even though this is a YA book, it sort of has this Victorian Gothic feel, which I really appreciated. It basically involves two sisters who run away from an abusive parent and go to stay with her aunt in this big house in the country. And while they are staying at this house, they realise that things aren't quite all that they seem, and they realise the trees seem to be getting closer and the building seems to be starting to rot, and her sister's going crazy. There's also a man who lives in the woods who these girls know as the Creeper Man, which sounds a bit paedophilic, but he is there sort of befriending the smaller girl. Told you. A lot happens in this book, but it is all good. I found it very stylistic in a way, and it's one of those books where, you know, where you're reading a book and you sort of picture in your head. The movie that was playing was just really interesting, and overall it was just a really interesting story. Before reading this, I actually assumed it was a ghost story, and I was very pleasantly surprised that it was not, and it was more sort of a psychological character study that's also slightly magical realist, I want to say. In the end though, like I said, I really enjoyed this book, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book we are going to talk about is going to be Sleeping Giants by Sylvia Nouvelle. This is a sci-fi novel. So this story basically involves a young girl who is walking through the woods one day, and she falls down a well because, you know, things happen. And while she is being rescued out, it turns out that she's been resting in sort of a giant metal hand that's like cusped like that. And after investigating this hand, it turns out that it's made of elements that are not found on Earth, and it's assumed that aliens have placed it there. And then they start finding more body parts of this sort of giant robot all over the world, and the whole book is sort of tasked with putting this robot back together and how it works and what it does. Overall, I did not find this novel terrible. I actually really liked the scope of the story. Once they actually start assembling the robot, it sort of goes into the ideas of what this means. I liked that it was not so much a story about aliens attacking us. It was almost more about understanding the technology that they have left behind and whether it was intended for us to find it. So I really liked that aspect of the novel. What I didn't like was the interview format. Now the whole novel is basically told with our main character interviewing each one of the teammates, and it just does not work for me. On the scientific aspects, it really does work, but every now and again you'll have our interviewer be like, "Hey Jenny, you and Tom are getting along well. What's going on there?" And it just seems really forced into the narrative. It seems like the author really wanted to include romance and the relationships between the crew, but she couldn't really do it organically in that format. It just ended up feeling really forced for me. In the end, I gave Sleeping Giants by Sylvia Nouvelle 2 stars, and I'm sad to say that I probably would not read the sequel. The next book we are going to talk about is a big one, and that is House of Leaves by Marcus Z. Danielewski. This is the problem with reading books on Kindle. You always forget the author's name. So House of Leaves is obviously a huge book, and it's also a very deep one. There are main 2 stories within this book. The one deals with this movie called The Navidson Project, which is basically about a family who move into a house one day, and they realise that their house is bigger on the inside than it should be from the outside. So one certain room, I think it's like 4 inches, but it just starts nagging at them. One section of this novel deals with the exploration of the house and what that means, and that was the best part for me. The second part deals with somebody who a few years later and is trying to sort of collect and understand the cult of the film and what it means, and that part I did not like so much. The part about the movie and the house is sort of told in a almost documentarian type of way, And even in times, it seems like somebody is watching the movie and making notes and telling you their thoughts, and almost like you're reading a textbook about something that really happened in a way. And I found that aspect of the book really, really interesting. The house and the mystery behind it, family relationships and how the house sort of affected those. If I could rate each individual section of the book, I would rate that section 5 stars, hands down. My problem came in the second half, where you have our main character trying to sort of find out all about the cult of the film, and there are some spooky scenes in this section as well, but I feel like most of it is sort of him just being depressed, having sex, lusting after this woman, and doing a lot of drugs. It was just such a huge juxtaposition between the two sections that this one just felt so out of place for me, and I didn't like the main character, and I sort of didn't really like where the story was going. Both sections are written in different fonts, and whenever I would see this font, I would just flick forward a couple of pages to see how big the section was, and if it was really big, I would put the book down, and I know that is not a good thing. So while I would give the first section 5 stars, I would give this section 2, and in the end I actually ended up giving the book 3.5 stars. I really appreciate the effort and everything that went into it, but I felt it was, while a great novel, it was also very, very flawed for me personally. The last book I'm going to talk about in this video is going to be Crimson Death by by Laurel K. Hamilton, and this is the 25th book in the Anita Blake series. This is an urban fantasy book, and this is a series that has gone on far, far too long. I've mentioned this series before on my channel, and it is a case of me being 25 books in and not willing to give it up until they end. If any of you have read this series after, say, book 10, the main thing you will want to know is if this is a story involving a case, or if this is just an excuse for the author to discuss sex and polyamorous relationships, and it's the latter. I gave it 1 star. I will read the next one, because I must hate myself. Then the last book I'm going to talk about today is going to be The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. Now, I read this book because I want to do a video on gay main characters in YA fantasy, and I heard in future books of this series one of the main characters turns out to be gay, and I'd also heard really, really good things, so I was like, hey, I'll read The Raven Boys, I'm sure I'll love it. But here's the thing. I have never really read a book where I read the reviews of people I trust, and I have never really felt such a huge difference of opinion. It was definitely a book where I really missed the Kool-Aid on this one. Even after I finished it, I looked up the reviews on GOODREADS, and a lot of people talked about how it was really character driven and that they really cared about the characters. But when I read the characters, all I saw was rich boy archetypes. Maybe this novel is just not one that is for me. The main story also includes some Welsh mythology, even though the book is set in Virginia, USA, and being from Wales, I find it really strange when books set in America include Welsh mythology. I also had a bit of an issue with it in the Cainesville trilogy by Kelly Armstrong. It always makes me think, why choose Welsh mythology? But overall, I was pretty disappointed by this book, and I gave it 2 stars. I went on to read a couple of chapters of The Dream Thieves just to see if it got any better, but I don't think this is a series that I will be continuing with. So there you have it, that is my brief wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you have read any of the books, leave me some comments below and we will have a little chat about them. But that is going to be all from me for today, so I shall see you soon with another video. Goodbye.